Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Let's face it, the future is now. We're living in a connected cyber society, and we need to stop ignoring it or pretending that it's not affecting us. Join us as we explore how humanity arrived at this current state of digital reality and what it means to live amongst so much technology and data. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high net worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io. BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com.
Marco.
Sean.
I think, did we count to 3 last time?
Yes. 1, 2, 3 NFT, and then I said Web.3, and then it got stupid from there. But
It did get stupid.
But then we had a really good guest that kind of make us looks and sound, mostly sound on the podcast, smart. So we're like, You know what? I like that. I like to sound smart. So we decided to bring him back.
So this time, do we do NFT 1, 2, 3 or 3, 2, 1? I don't know. What are we doing this time? Well, I know we started with an idea and didn't do anything on that topic last time. We just went all over the place. And
let's show how much we follow the script, which, by the way, we don't have. But I think that's the beauty of what we do. Now, we wanted to talk about NFTs and Web.3, but it's such a complicated, extended topic, especially when you put different perspective, different angle on it, that, we ended up not talking about the NFT. So I think if you do 1, 2, 3 NFTs, maybe magically you're clicking your shoes, I guess. And he will appear.
I think I closed with TFN. This effing no way. I don't know what that stands.
Oh yeah, there was the acronym story.
Let's stick to the topic. So first off, I got a great guest. You certainly made us think. Hopefully, our audience is enjoying the first episode with you, Connor Borrego. Thanks for being on again.
Marco, Sean, thank you for having me back, and I'll try to stay on topic this time.
That's if
or not. It's okay.
We'll see where things go, and that's a sign of technology, right? Sometimes you build something and it gets used in ways that was never intended or never thought of, and I don't know blockchain certainly was built for something, but it's getting used for everything, right? So I think that's a perfect example of how something can be reused and repurposed for many, many things, including NFTs.
Absolutely. I think that there couldn't be a better example of something like that. It set out with a mission to revolutionize finance, and the method in which it's using it's affecting everything related to software, specifically data storage, and that's where NFTs really come into the conversation. So.
Well, before we actually get into that, we definitely want people to listen to the first episode, but not just to hear your background. So for those listening to this now, a few words about your journey to this point and what you're working on now.
To keep it really simple, I have a master's in data science and an undergrad in political science and entrepreneurship. I used to work at Google as a digital growth strategist, helping brands scale their advertising efforts when they'd raise, venture capital between $5 and $50 million. So all of this kind of led me to Web3 in a really roundabout, indirect manner, just out of, outside interest that I had and different mentors kind of pushing me along the way. I saw an opportunity, what I understood with the advertising ecosystem, NFTs and Web3, to kind of jump in and hopefully help musicians and content creators at large own a larger percentage of the revenue that comes from their digital creations and products. And, when you start talking about digital creations and products, it makes sense to tie that with NFTs. And while I see NFTs as something far more expansive than just collectible images, that's a great jumping off point for the conversation.
Yeah, it is. I can make a couple of connections just to Sean, you said people shouldn't listen to the first episode to learn about Connor, but they should listen to the first episode because we're probably going to refer to it quite a bit.
We are. I think the Connor's background is much more in depth in that one as well. And there's a ton of stuff that he's done, which is super relevant. So definitely catch it.
So I think that to start here, last time we talked about the platform in particular, the Web3, what it means, what take back our data, maybe monetize on that, don't just give it away, and be sure that I don't know, maybe there is not just in the hands of few companies, but that everybody, even the community, the small businesses can get together and have a different vision instead of the big players dictating the rules. Again, go listen to the first episode, please. But one thing that really stuck to us was, one, we wanted to learn more about NFTs and how these apply to the music and the arts in general. Because, artists, many times they get, I don't think they really, unless you get really big, you don't get all the payoff from what you deserve, unless you're, again, the big bands and the big artists and all of that. So let's start with the NFTs and then the connection of why would it be valuable for musicians and photographers and designers and all of that.
Absolutely. So I think to jump off with musicians, right? There was this idea, I believe, floating around in the 80s or 90s. This is when I was really young, so don't quote me on it. But I think the idea was if you could find 1,000 true fans, that you could pretty much build a viable career as a musician. And I'm not really sure who said that or where that's necessarily attributed to, but I don't think that was necessarily true up until the invention of NFTs. And the reason why I say that is because what we've seen, some musicians and some platforms like Royal.io and Sound XYZ take as an approach to helping musicians leverage the technology is by doing limited release drops of singles, of albums that are collectible, that are tied to streams or revenues potentially from the commercialization of that music down the road. But more specifically, as essentially a collectible that can signify early fandom to the user, or not to outside observers, that they were someone who was very early to this person's music, which in, I think, music culture is actually kind of a big thing for people who are writers or about the music industry, or curators who generate playlists. Being the first to identify a new sound, a new musician, is a point of pride for a lot of members within the music and entertainment community. And this NFT becomes a badge of honor that not only allows you to signify that you were an early supporter of this musician, but you actually equip that musician with funds that they could use to further produce additional songs, music videos, or to commercialize and promote their music on streaming platforms, which would drive up, the revenue associated with your percent ownership if it happened to be a royalty distribution NFT. But an NFT, in this case, is just identifying the song that has been, as a file that's recorded to the blockchain. And the file itself is often not even actually stored on the blockchain, but more directed to another storage system, many of which are powered by cryptographic technologies that are similar to blockchain to sort of decentralize it. But at the same time, it isn't stored directly on the blockchain, just the pointer to that data is stored there. I think that's often something that people like to bring up as a nuance point. So I'm just calling that out.
We dig into that in the last episode as well. We spent a little time on the file storage. Can I pause you for a moment? And I want to talk about what's stored with the transaction. Because you said, so somebody's connected to an artist early on with that song. I can harken back to my days where rap music was being mixed and special mixes were being created by different people, and there might be only one of that mix that came from some party, right? And so that would be a unique thing. And what I was hoping, if I had, I'm sure I have that mix on a tape somewhere, but I don't know who mixed it. I don't know, unless I dig it all up, who all the artists are that are part of the mix. So I'm just thinking like DJs, what's stored in the quote unquote NFT to say who created it, what IP is part of it, who bought it, is there a history of who owned it if it gets passed along or sold? Can you share a little bit what's in there?
Absolutely. So it's hard to say specifically what's in there because it would vary by the NFT contract you use to mint your music, right? But what's become very popular with a lot of musicians and these creators is to invite the entire creative team to profit from the royalties of it. So, if there's a songwriter, a sound mixer, and, the actual artists, let's say they're just performing it, providing vocals, maybe providing instrumentals, each of those individuals who are associated with the creation of the creative output, right? In this case, the song, can be all worked into that royalty distribution programmatically. And so essentially what that would mean is that they would have a wallet set up, that's tied to their profile, that, any funds that are generated from the sale of this NFT go into their wallet. But yeah, it's interesting that you bring up, what I would call provenance, right? To the record of ownership over that NFT, right? So, in this case, we're going to sell 10 editions potentially of the same song, and we're going to see who's the current holder of all 10 of those editions. But again, because it's recorded the blockchain, if we'd like to look up what other wallets were the previous owners of that NFT, you can see that transaction history, as well as the amount that, the NFT, the ownership of that song was exchanged for. So you can see the value of it increase or decrease over time through those exchanges. And when you have multiple copies of the song, you can actually establish potentially a market value for it because you would have multiple transactions to actually compare the liquid market value of the song to kind of support that. So it creates a marketplace for these collectibles just by, sort of a feature of the use case of the blockchain. But the other data that could be stored on there, could be, the album artwork and the artist associated with that. It could potentially be a music video that gets released. It could be a link to a larger NFT that's representative of the album. It's as limitless as, the optionality that you could design for an application with a media interface. It really would depend on how that music is going to be used beyond that initial sale that, they would have wanted to incorporate some of that information up front with. But I think that's why it's such a new space too. We're still exploring and figuring that out.
I'm just wondering, does that mean that in this case, that song or that album is only playable through an NFT-enabled interface where you unlock it with your credentials, or what does that look like?
So again, it depends on how it's set up, right? A lot of these are set up as singles, right, where you own it and then you download the MP3. So yes, you could play it through one of the marketplaces. They're often set up with, the capability to visualize or to display the media that's kind of in the underlying contract. And we're not talking about changing the file types here. So you could expect an MP3. So an MP3 player on most sites would be able to use it. But what I imagine is that as we get further down the NFT rabbit hole 2-3 years out, we see a streaming platform emerge that utilizes an NFT to kind of manage royalties around streaming data. But right now, there isn't really too much in the way of a viable option of that. I know that there are a couple of platforms experimenting with it, so that's why I do think it's coming. It's definitely not there yet, though.
Oh, so this is very exciting. I'm a pretty big, define myself as a music fan. I've seen a ton of concert. I've been, in the mosh pit many times, especially younger, from Iron Maiden.
Mashed potato pit.
Mashed potato pit, but and you were fighting maybe to get, the pick that the guitar player would throw at you, or the drumstick, and then you will go out, and I'm trying to picture a real life scenario here where you leave, and then there's all the merchandise. I'm gonna get the T-shirt. I'm gonna get maybe the signed book if I have the money for that, or whatever, and then I keep the ticket because that's a badge of honor to have that David Bowie concert or something like that. Yeah. And so I'm envisioning that we transporting this into a certified, authentic provenance. Yes. Then it's just up to the creativity of the artist and the branding, marketing machine behind it. And I know that he's actually, and I had a conversation, I almost forgot about it, more than a year ago with Josh Katz, which is the founder and CEO of Yellow Heart in Manhattan, and they do ticketing with NFTs. So they attach bonus value to certain tickets, and it can come with an exclusive, piece from, I don't know, Maroon 5 or whatever it is. So are we going to find ourselves in a situation where the artist can really cash on this, or the middleman is still going to make most of the money unless you are, I don't know, Metallica?
So I love that question. And yeah, I think that you bringing up the ticketing use case is super awesome, because I think that that's probably going to be one of the more prolific ones we see here soon. I've actually seen a music festival pre-selling their passes to the music festival as NFTs, and there gets you other VIP rights there. So yeah, the question is, are the middlemen going to continue to be the outsized winners in these situations? I think that in the short term, we're going to continue to see that. And I think that's going to be because the business managers are going to be the ones making the decision to take the risk and bring their artists onto the platform. But I think in the process, they'll be disintermediating themselves in a lot of these services, and they're going to have to rethink their business model over the long run, as kind of these SoundCloud artists, for lack of a better word, become more familiar with the Web3 tooling that would enable them to bypass some of the more predatory relationships that they can have with record labels and managers. But again, because a lot of this is knowledge gated, I do think that in the transitionary period, a lot of legacy kind of relationships will continue to persist into the environment. And I think you'll see that reflected in sort of the contract royalty distributions. Likely many of the wallets that will be holders of the royalty distributions for large name artists are going to be the management or agency records that own their contracts and music rights presently. Like I said, because of some of the more collaborative elements to Web3, we could see a competitive SaaS. This is kind of where my business kind of fits in, right? Is we'd like to offer this to any musician or artist, But, it's going to take building out a more robust community and demand for the purchasing side of things, and, some people with more capital up front to invest in the software development on that side of things. So it'd be nice if we could get a community-run initiative well-funded enough right off the bat so that we could help bypass some of those concerns. But I think being practical and realistic about it, there's nothing going to stop those agencies from reproducing their contracts on Web3. And it will be ultimately a choice of the artist to go work with their brand name. And that might be what they're trading up those royalty distribution for, is the brand name recognition of the larger agency. But I think the value that the agency adds is going to continue to be diminished to more coordinating partnerships for in real life events and coordinating logistics for touring and maybe merchandising, and kind of some more like the soft human to human activities, and a lot less of the digital operations, which I think, is where they charge a lot of their pricing for now, but won't be something they'll be able to continue to do long term.
And I want to add on this, and I know probably Sean wants to get on it, but one other thing that we talked about, and it's still like connected to, in a way, that certification that you have attached to it, was in the ticketing industry doing the NFTs, it would be avoiding, for example, scalping, like buying all the ticket and then the reselling, because you attach your crypto contract there. And so you could track that, which will be already a pretty good thing, because I was reading in the news the other day that to see Bruce Springsteen would be $5,000 to start. Not going to happen, but not even right, because honestly, he doesn't want to sell that at $5,000. He's out of control. But if you can control the way you sell the ticket online, that's already something good for the artist, because he's not cashing the money of the scalping.
I think one of the things that'll be challenging, right, with that whole idea, is that he will need to verify who his fans or audience members are beforehand, because I could see a scenario or an instance where someone spins up a swarm of bots or crypto wallets to go make purchases into individual wallets that would each be individual ticket purchases, but, then transferring that to a centralized wallet. And it doesn't seem that far-fetched to me that someone would go to the lengths to write a script like that. Now, if you were to put a gate in front of that purchase process and say, hey, you have to be an official holder of, this, let's call it the boss NFT here, for lack of better words, since we're talking about the boss himself. And maybe that's a nominal price, but it's a nominal price high enough that the entire bot swarm isn't going to have all of these NFTs. And if they were doing something that effect, you could block those NFT holders in the future, so it would only affect one show. But, again, we're getting into a game of cat and mouse, because there's always people who are going to be out there trying to find a way to gamify the system. But I do think it does move us in the right direction towards being able to solve for some of these problems. But, I don't think there'll ever be necessarily a foolproof solution here, because, like I said, there's always people trying to get an edge on the game.
Those pesky bots, John.
The bots want to get in on the game as well. And let's stick with that for a minute, because, I mean, the reality is there's always going to be some game playing, right, of the system, whatever the system is, and each system will have different rules. The question I have is, I don't know, maybe it's just the platform, but I mean, like ticket sales, a paper ticket, right? You buy a ticket, that move to, you get an electronic ticket that's an image on your phone or a QR code or something. And and I don't know this, do the artists have to worry about that kind of stuff? I'm just wondering, I mean, they're not building these systems.
Right.
But I'm just wondering, how much NFT does the artist need to understand, or how do they get into it and not get in a world where they're losing their shirts?
Yeah. I think those are valid questions for sure. So I think that, on some level, they need to be familiar with a lot of the concepts of the technology, right? What is it used for? What's its purpose? Kind of why does, what makes it better than the existing system? So in this case, if we're having centralized ticket exchanges versus a decentralized ticket exchange, what is the value of a decentralized ticket exchange? I think, really what that comes down to is you could, as musicians, assuming you're part of the marketplace and making decisions on the sale of your tickets, you might not have to understand the coding, but you could understand what rules you want to set for what it takes to purchase a ticket. Right. And so that's where this, token gating of purchasing could come in to help reduce the likelihood of scalping. And I don't think that the musicians themselves would have to know much about the technology in order for that to be beneficial to them. But I think that in terms of protecting themselves from predatory deals with people who understand the technology better than them, it could be detrimental because, the smart contracts that are ultimately going to be in charge of selling or collecting royalties, whether it's a piece of merchandise, a digital collectible, a ticket, their song, someone that they trust should be able to kind of look through that contract the same way you would want a lawyer that was independent of your management agency or record label to look through a contract and tell you, hey, there's nothing in here that, you weren't expecting or that's, overtly predatory towards you and what you're doing. So I think that to the extent that you can be familiar with the technology, it's to your betterment. But, doing, I think, some basic level amount of education on yourself is definitely important if you want to take advantage of the space. If you're not really worried about your intellectual property rights being up for sale and you're just trying to open new revenue streams, I think there are opportunities in that realm as well that, you wouldn't necessarily need to be, super savvy with NFTs. But again, the more you know, the better you're going to feel about what you're doing in the space and the more likely you are to probably have success. But it's not a hard and fast rule, I'd say.
And I think it just come back to the size. Like, instead of the company that we were talking about on the other podcast, here we're talking about the artist, which is still a business at a certain point. So I guess if you're the small artist as the small business, maybe you need to be somehow knowledgeable about it because you don't have the agent and the entire system behind you that can take care of that. So I think a facilitation of these, an interface that is easy to use. This said, let's bring it back to society and therefore the users of this, right? So how do you envision, for example, a lot of people thinking about NFTs now, they think about, the Bored Ape or other stuff that come in the news just because it sells for $600,000 and you wonder why. But there's also other stuff made by artificial intelligence, artists or whatever it is. And so I'm trying to envision how are the user that are not really into crypto and because let's face it, even just to start a wallet, to buy a piece of NFTs, you need a certain knowledge. It's not that easy.
Yep.
Where can we go with this? Then does it become like an exchange of memorabilia? Does it become a collector, a market for that? Help me to envision the future.
So I think it comes down to a few different products, really, that could all be interrelated. There's the product that I like to see, which is around, let's call it music discovery and artist discovery. And that's where I think I'm working. And that's beneficial to musicians, but not necessarily users, but potentially users. Essentially, if you're allow users to help other musicians get discovered by adding them to a playlist, and you have a fairly large following as a playlist creator, there's a way to monetize that engagement. And not necessarily insert my business as the middleman, but if I'm providing the infrastructure for that, that's how that interaction could be monetized, right? And there's things beyond that, like if we have this playlist, you can produce content from it, which would be beneficial from an SEO perspective. And what I mean by that is like writing a post about your curated playlist, right, that talks to maybe the rationale for the ranking or the ordering of the playlist you've created, right? And all of those things go to help the musician get discovered. So one of the things that would be nice is if that entire platform is owned by, let's call them the curators and the creators, right? They could start to segment their audiences based on the different, genres of music and the subgenres and niches that these musicians represent to really help improve the discoverability of their music. And so that benefits, I think music fans, both passive and super engaged, with finding new ways to, kind of discover music that aren't necessarily AI powered. And I think that's a refreshing take from, the TikTok feed approach, which I'm also a big fan of, but for different reasons. So music discoverability is a platform, number one. I think that ticket sales and event ticket sales, which would be much larger than just music, creates a new form of memorabilia, but it adds more value in terms of hopefully allowing real fans to access affordable prices to see the artists that they want to see. And the artists want that to happen because it inspires a stronger engagement and relationship between their fans and them, by creating those real life memories that are going to hopefully add value to the first memorabilia collectible they have, the ticket sale. And if they had collectible merch available for sale that was associated with NFTs at the concert, RFID tags can be sewn directly into clothing now and associated with NFTs. So there are ways to really continue to expand that fan experience from just the memorabilia collectible aspect. And then kind of going on to the streaming side of things, this has to do more with helping musicians break away from the large record label model and into more of a self-funded model. Because if you're able to sell, let's say 1,000 fans, is kind of still a ridiculous idea. What you do have today are a lot of NFT people who are very excited to collect music NFTs and to collect NFTs broadly. They're not very discriminate. So that's not necessarily great for the musician in terms of building a loyal fan base, but it does do something for them in terms of accessing capital that they can reinvest into growing themselves and their audience, and eventually turning their musical properties into something valuable. So I think that in helping musicians to facilitate their business model really early on, again, really does a whole lot there for helping them to access capital that they would need to grow themselves independent of a label. Now, where does the user benefit the most from all of these things? I think that musicians are more likely to kind of undercut the money I think we see a lot of bloat in the cost of things because of middle management, surcharges basically. And so with a lot of these entities potentially removed from the supply chain process, let's call it, in delivering, the music experience on behalf of the musician, right, then pricing in general kind of comes down from all of those other elements because they don't have to add that in as a premium or a percent of margin baked into their business model. So, from that perspective, the users might be able to access the artists at better price points, and the artists would take home even more of the money. So they'd be earning more. And, potentially that relationship, is a virtuous flywheel. We don't really know because we haven't been in that environment. So I think, while the use case of the user is still a little flimsy, especially with how difficult it is to onboard to the system at this time, I think it's more of a waiting game to develop either the platform from a streaming perspective, a ticketing and memorabilia perspective, or a growth and marketing perspective that's going to provide a streamlined onboarding process for regular users that kind of abstracts away the password key management issues. And that does get into the discussion is this platform decentralized if users don't kind of, own their own keys? But that was kind of what we talked about last time. And so I'll kind of save that as an illusion for that. But, the users themselves, I think that we still have a long way to go before we see anything tangible for them to really, I don't know, benefit or get excited about.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that because a lot of the stuff you said would be a good thing for the artist requires a fan base, right? And it seems like the barrier to join for the ordinary user is super high. And so I'm wondering if they're limiting their exposure. And I'm just wondering also, because if we look at something like Spotify, and I don't remember where I heard it and what the number was, but something like the Happy song only made a few $1,000 or something from the partial pennies of royalties or cuts from Spotify that he got. I see perhaps the artist making more money than they would on a huge platform. But if there are many platforms, do they have to be on all of them? And which ones do the users then choose to be part of? And are they, I'm asking a lot here, but will the user also then have to change the way they think about it, where it's, I don't know what the price is, $10 a month for an unlimited streaming of all music all the time on a Spotify versus I want to pay 20 cents to listen to this right now?
Absolutely. So I think that's a really great question. So when it comes to what does that look like in practice, right? NFT, like, let's make the assumption that there's only one NFT for every song. Like, if that's our assumption here, right? The artist only released one NFT for this song. It is the same NFT that's basically referenced on Spotify, on SoundCloud, on YouTube, on every single streaming platform. So what is nice about this is the artist only has to make the song available as an NFT once. Let's just say assuming it's a royalty streaming NFT. And so the streaming platform would be able to leverage the existing smart contract to stream the NFT on their platform and paying the licensing agreement. Now, how the platform decides to charge the user is up to them. They could monetize it through ads. They could monetize it through subscription. They could monetize it through single play microtransactions. I think the platforms that will, ultimately win out in the long run are going to be the platforms that can produce some form of arbitrage between their monthly subscription price and, essentially what they have to pay out for the micro, costs of streaming the songs, individually every month, and forecast, all right, this user can be expected to stream this many hours of music, and our average cost per song is like this microtransaction. We'd expect this many microtransactions over the month. So that comes out to this dollar point. We need to charge, $10, $15 above that. And, that could be realistically the way that they price this, if they go a Spotify direction. But I imagine that, like, what we'll see is a bunch of different platforms that don't necessarily charge to list the song. They might charge to play the song, so the microtransaction, but they will be building value on their web property in other ways than related more to music discovery. And I think that large platforms like Spotify will just leverage the existing kind of NFT to provide the streaming access using that arbitrage model. But I think what you'll see is, yes, a lot more options for users, but it'll be more around, again, finding new artists or potentially, curating a vibe or a sound aesthetic, as opposed to kind of like a broad streaming platform where you can get everything. Though I do think that will emerge. It's more likely that Spotify pivots and provides and facilitates that when the infrastructure is in place. Then, kind of seeing a Web3 company get VC fueled all the way to the top to compete directly with Spotify on an offering like this. Because I think that I don't think there's a way for the VC model to cash out on that. And so maybe like a natural competitor to Spotify emerges, but it's more likely that Spotify pivots and opens up their Pandora's box of a data model to leverage these NFTs.
Okay, so this is what I'm picturing in my mind is the beginning of the web when we were doing websites and I was doing those being in advertising. it was kind of like, all right, now we got to find a way to put the brochure online. Like, so we were leveraging technology, the digital world, but still thinking in an analog world. And I feel like we're kind of doing the same thing here, meaning translating a tangible object into an NFTs. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I'm going to say the word metaverse or virtual reality. I feel like the real payoff for this, it will be when, as a society, we really change the way we actually consume this art, either the music in a more immersive way, maybe in a metaverse kind of way, at a virtual concert, interacting with the virtual avatar of the artist. I mean, I'm going a little nuts here, but and then I'm going to go to the flea market and buy a vinyl this weekend because I like that. But I also like to think that the opposite.
You cracked them and smashed them. I know.
I just like to scratch them. But let's take this remaining maybe 10 minutes or so to envision what is going to be that it can really make the difference instead of just adapting what we got with the technology. Let's just go crazy on that.
I wish I had a better imagination for stuff like that. I very much work within the bounds of where we kind of exist today. So I'm very much what I call Web 2.5. How do we bridge Web 2 to Web 3?
I'm at Web 10, so go for it.
Absolutely. I wish I was that visionary. But
because I don't have technology reference, so it's just a fantasy world for me.
I only think in terms of software, so I'm just limited by what I understand right now. But I think from a VR, AR perspective, like, you're definitely right. The more we get to an immersive environment, or like even just mixed reality, right, where the lines are starting to blur between the metadata that we interact with in our everyday life and kind of like the virtual identity where we've at least pretty much established for ourselves now, we just don't necessarily own. That digital identity belongs to the software system it's imprinted in, whether that's Facebook or Google at all, big tech. So I get caught up in the whole metaverse commentary because it frustrates me a little bit because I think it really pushes towards the video game environment of things. And I think the metaverse has more to do with metadata and, data governance than it does with, an immersive environment. But I think that, they're both getting at the same point, which is there's a lot more data that's involved in all of these systems than we necessarily, recognize. And that data has to do with kind of the predictability of behavior within those environments. And so that's machine learning, AI. We could kind of spend a whole bunch of time going into that. But for me, the reason why I see things the way I do is because a lot of that metadata is locked away in disparate software systems today that don't speak to each other, that could add value to these small businesses. If you're talking in more of a larger immersive environment, the music and art, I think the ways in which we'll see these things commercialized are about as limitless as those artists' own imagination and perspectives. You were talking about some of these AI-generated art pieces earlier. And one of the ones that I like quite a bit is, I want to say it's called Deezers, but it might be called Gazers. I have to double check. But the project basically has created a moon that exists on like a time interval that could span thousands and thousands of years in the future. And the image itself is slowly updating to reflect what phase the moon is in that calendar. And it's not anything terribly fancy or complicated, but the concept of this image that could very well, and for many people, outlast their existence by multiple powers of 10 of their own life is kind of just like something to ponder. And it's like whether the art or whether the blockchain that is recording this data actually persists long enough for the art piece to fully iterate through its cycles, it's not like I'm going to be around to know. And I think that that's kind of artsy in its own way. Maybe I'm nerding out over the wrong piece here right now, but I think that these pieces that kind of get people to ponder questions that they don't really encounter in their everyday life, are kind of like an early introduction to, the boundless thinking that this immersive environment of augmented reality or virtual reality is going to provide creators like this. And so while I'm not a creator or an artist, and I'm certainly not creative in those capacities, I really it's hard for me to imagine a limitation on what could be created in the future by people who are far more imaginative than me.
And it makes me wonder, we've talked about it sometimes in the context of the metaverse versus where you might have a quote unquote property or an asset that lives in one, and can you take it out and move it to another? Does it have any value in real life? And now you're talking about the longevity and sustainability of these things. And we can look to technology. Windows 95. Mm-hmm. Some people may use it, right? Probably hardly anybody does that really cares about technology. So they let it go. It's a small investment. They use it for what they want, and when it quote unquote expires, it expires. But you look into the business world where companies have invested gazillions of dollars in mainframe infrastructures, right? Those still exist. And because there's a huge investment, and those things will carry on to a point, right? We're starting to see some of that phase out with the cloud, of course. So I guess my question is, if there is one, what do you see will drive the stickiness of the stuff? Is it going to be money? If somebody invests $10 million in an NFT, and they expect to pass that down to their kids and grandkids and whatnot, they're going to want that $10 million to be there.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid question that, people who are looking at NFTs as an investment are certainly asking themselves. I don't approach NFTs as an investment. I think of them as a tool for database management, data governance. That being said, because of the scarcity property, because of the publicly verifiable property that they have, it does make them potentially collectible. So I think when the collectible is associated with a brand that, you believe is going to have longevity and value, then that collectible will likely have a market. Who knows how liquid that market will be, but of people who want to collect that memorabilia, and that could be a valid investment strategy for some people, especially people who have a lot more experience in the industry that the brand they've collected operates in. Now, when it comes to what's going to make NFTs super sticky, super valuable, why would this actually win out over the current environment? This is my hypothesis, so I don't know how accurate it is, but it is what I'm working with as an assumption to build my business and approach the market. But it's basically that collaborative intelligence is greater than competitive intelligence. And what I mean by that is what we've seen from large corporations today is the value that their scale enterprise data has in improving operational efficiencies, not just in marketing and advertising, but across all the KPIs in their business. And what enables them to have that sort of scale efficiency is the scale size of their data sets. Because when we look at data and statistics, we know that, as the sample size increases, we're able to increase the confidence in our predictions around the data set for whatever we're optimizing towards. And there's other things we have to consider about the representation of that, data set as well. But for the lack of nuance here, the larger the data set, the more effective the predictions. And when you have a competitive environment where it's company A versus company B, the company with the bigger data set's going to be able to leverage the artificial intelligence and machine learning models with greater accuracy than the company with the smaller data set. So in companies and industries where it would make sense for businesses to pool their operational data together because it's not necessarily a competitive differentiator for them, they're going to be able to glean insights that they wouldn't able to do on their own. And I think that that's going to attract a lot of small businesses in, that's going to disrupt larger larger enterprise players, because they'll no longer be reliant or dependent on their tooling or what's being provided to them through those systems, because they're able to achieve kind of the same results through a collaborative approach instead of, this third-party partner kind of approach. And so the direct example I'd like to use is like with electricians. Right now, if an electrician wants to go and, basically place an ad on Google, they're more than likely going to come up against Angie's List or Yelp in the search results. And Angie's List and Yelp, being the much larger company with a lot more data on electricians, is going to be able to purchase that ad spot for way cheaper than the individual electrician's going to be. But if the electricians were to pool their marketing data together, they would be able to achieve parity, if not potentially beat the scale data sets of Yelp and Angie's List, and negate the need to have to also go buy on their platform. Now, there's other reasons to buy on Angie's List and Yelp, but this is just kind of like an example of how collaborative intelligence would be more efficient than competitive intelligence in one use case.
Yeah, and we touched on that a bit as well in the last episode with a slightly deeper dive on that. And I think the interesting thing here is, because we talked about Web3, where the data is owned by the creator of the data, right? And only shared when they want to, with whom they want to share it. And I think in your example of the electricians coming together, sharing their data, they're trusting each other to do good things with it, right? And perhaps even their customers doing the same, because customers want to get the best service as well for the best price. So,
absolutely, I kind of see them as digital guilds. So there's definitely ways that could be, negative as well. But I think on the whole that, more of these business owners than not operate from they're small businesses. So their reputation matters more than I think a lot of large companies. So I think they often operate from a lot more reasonable place of, reputational risk and safety in terms of what they're doing as a business.
Well, I mean, just to wrap here, the way I see it is that we're on a point now that there is a scalable solution. Let's say there is a technology that we can apply to a lot of things with our own creativity. I'm being kind of idealistic here. I'm connecting with a small business you talked about last time, the guild. I'm talking about the artist, and we didn't touch on, we talked about musician, but we can talk about photographer, painters, whatever you want, writers, anything that you can attach and added more ephemeral value to it, but it could be monetized. And I think it's an important, probably, I'm thinking one of the first time, if not the first time in the history of our society, where we have a technology, and maybe we don't know exactly what to do with it, but there could be a lot of application, and here the creativity. I mean, today we've done a lot of thinking. We throw some ideas, some hypotheses on how feasible can be something, how great will be if we could do it. And I'm hoping, again, this is a new opportunity maybe to use the technology in our society for doing something better, instead of putting it in the hands of a few and then squeezing everybody else. So take that, big man.
I'm going to do what you hate, Marco. I have one more question.
No, one more question.
I do have one more question. I can't let it go.
Steve Martin is here.
I'm on this, and less from a business perspective, but more from a what's possible perspective. And the collaborative environment and intelligence is much more powerful than competitive. We see some of that in this is why I feel I can ask you this question: open source code. Mm-hmm. And where there's a community that generates code that gets used as libraries and APIs to build other things, and multiple libraries and APIs get bundled together with some logic on top to build something that we haven't had yet. Mm-hmm. Those communities don't benefit. The open source groups don't necessarily benefit unless they turn a version of it into commercial. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, with your understanding of that, assuming you work with some of that as well, is there a relationship there? Is there an opportunity there from an NFT perspective?
Yeah, so I love this question a lot, actually, because I've thought about it also quite a bit, actually. But I think it's an evolution on open source technology. I think one of the shortcomings of open source is the commercialization process. I think that incentives, especially financial incentives, are important for motivating people to, accomplish tasks and to solve problems. I know that lots of people do things out of the goodness of their heart, but it's much easier for them to prioritize working on those things when their basic needs are met, and sometimes when those needs are exceeded, just because that's a part of the motivation that drives them to do what they do, and allows them to make that a priority. And so what I like about sort of the Web3 blockchain space is it is sort of capitalistic in the sense that, it requires capital allocation in order to get many of these projects off the ground. But the approach we see in a lot of, I would say, Web3 founders and Web3 communities is one that leads with transparency, with open roadmaps, with open communication, which I think is kind of representative of almost like the forums and the, projects that, kind of come open source, that come out of conversations that occur on obscure corners of the internet. But it just provides them with a way to actually, maintain, because many of these systems cannot operate in isolation and don't operate without costs. And I think one of the shortcomings of open source is it doesn't account for the cost factor that actually goes into the development of many of these systems. And I'm not saying that people need to profit exorbitantly over these things, but compensation for work and compensation for your contribution to something isn't wrong either. And, like I said, I think it's more of like an evolution or a next step on open source, but it provides a more reasonable framework to actually facilitate the operations that need to kind of bring a lot of these open source projects to light. It's great that like really well-paid engineers at some of the top tech companies decide to do these things on their side and like on their own. But there's so many other developers and programmers out there who can't participate in a lot of these open source projects. Sure, they benefit from them, but they can't become contributors without, kind of working odd and end hours, and potentially without, any sort of recognition for their contributions. And so I think that, this is kind of where blockchain may provide an evolution on that. NFTs specifically, I think it kind of, there's a lot of references to like the Creative Commons licenses. A lot of the NFTs are just representing the Creative Commons licenses, so there aren't really financial things attached to them. They're just free and open use. But what it does is it's still giving credit to the creator of the image. So at the very least, they can use that as a part of their portfolio. And even though it's open source and openly usable by many people, they can take credit for what they created. And I think that the credit element of this is also important. And that's kind of where the NFT kind of comes into. So this is a rambly way to answer your question, but I don't have a concrete answer. Is kind of why I'm struggling with it. But I definitely have thought about it quite a bit myself. So,
well, and in the end, this is more of a technology perspective where a lot of people that are in working in the backstage will worry about it. I feel like in the end we want this to work, but the musician wants to make music and make money out of it. The other artist wants to build his own art and make a living and maybe establish a legacy for that. And the users want to enjoy it, hopefully with owning their data and in a safe way and maintaining the value. So at the end, there's two, three, four, five things that need to all work in order to deliver the right solution, which in the end, I think it's what we really want. I mean, it's all fun and games, a lot of theory, but in the end, it's about how we're going to use it and how we're going to enjoy it. So, Sean, that's for me from the society perspective.
and I'll stick with that a little bit because I think as we wrap here, just the idea that, hard times creates good music and good art, right? Those experiences of hard times, it generates emotions and things that create some interesting art. But then getting that art into the hands of the right people, or as many people as you possibly can, becomes a challenge, right? And a burden that many artists can't handle. And that's why they turn to the labels. That's why they turn to galleries and things like that, and agents, where big chunks of their money comes out. And it sounds like they can take back control with this and be collaborative with their peers to be part of a guild, whatever you want to call it, to really get their work into the hands of the people that really care about it.
Yep. And with all this said, now I'm going to play a vinyl. Old school. So
Nice.
don't bother me with that. There's no NFT there.
I'm licensing the use of the needle for that.
But if you play it backwards, you may hear the message of
Number
the devil.
9. Number 9.
You never know.
Number 9. I have a number 9 behind me.
There you go. All right. Well, we're going to close these when almost an hour. So, Connor, always great talking to you. We just hang out and talk about interesting things and looking at different perspective. And again, hope we can make people think. This is redefining society. We don't know where we're going, but we know that we're moving, and that's very important. So if you enjoy this conversation, there'll be links to connect with Connor in the show notes, and we'll keep
link
talking.
to the other episode as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like if we haven't teased the other episode enough, now you're closing with that. Listen to that episode. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, now's a good time to go and do that.
BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com. Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high net worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.